Hello, I'm Liselle Sambury, a young adult fantasy and sci-fi author, and today I'm doing a writing craft book review, which isn't something I've ever done before, but in this case I read like a writing craft book that I thought would be really helpful for people, and I wanted to chat about it a bit more, and that is, I'm going to put it over here, On Writing and Worldbuilding, Volume 1 by Timothy Hickson. So I realized that I figured this out later. I didn't know it prior to reading the book. I actually learned as I finished the book. A friend was like, oh, doesn't he have a YouTube channel? So he does have a YouTube channel. It's called Hello Future Me. I'll link all of that below, where he talks more about like the subject of like world building and that sort of thing, and fantasy systems and magic systems and sci-fi and all of that, and kind of breaking it down in a critical way. So that was really cool to discover that. So you could probably watch a few of his videos. I haven't watched any yet, but yeah, you probably watch a few of his videos and learn some of the stuff that's in the book. But today I'm going to talk about the book specifically. And the reason I picked up this book is because I was trying to look for writing craft books that very specifically discussed fantasy and sci-fi. I just find that so many writing craft books are extremely general. I imagine because they're trying to appeal to as many people as possible so that you could get as many sales as possible. But I was really looking for one that was specific to fantasy and sci-fi and specific to world building, because in the past I've previously just pantsed all my world building systems, and it creates so much trouble for me because then I have to do so much backtracking to fix all of my world building. And I really wanted to, in my future books going forward, plan my world building as meticulously as I plan the rest of my books, but I wasn't really sure how to go about that. I just find that world building Bibles, like when people have kind of templates for them, I don't find those to be helpful in the same way I don't find filling out a character sheet to be helpful. So I was really looking for a book that could help guide me in a sort of a more concrete way. And so that's when I found this book, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Let's talk about the pros. So the first thing I really liked about this book is the examples. He uses relevant, up-to-date examples in a concise fashion, and they are from books and movies that have been published and shown in the last 5 years, which is really important, and they're from across age ranges. So they have adult titles, young adult titles, and middle grade titles, and also like TV shows that people have actually heard of. Avatar: The Last Airbender he brings up. He also talks about some video games, so like Elder Scrolls and Assassin's Creed, some of the books he mentions, Percy Jackson, The Hunger Games. I'm trying to think of other ones. Oh, but just like a bunch of really, Game of Thrones, lots of Game of Thrones stuff in there. But really relevant examples that I was so happy about, because so often I find craft books use examples from like books that are like so in the past, and you only get to see that perspective. And the way fantasy books were written and published in the past is not the way they were written and published today. And I like that because he addresses that. He talks about like the way that Tolkien would write his fantasy. You probably could not get away with writing fantasy like that today. It was huge, long, sweeping descriptions, because it's just the way that things have shifted, which I really appreciated. And also the examples are very concise. So he says the example and he explains it and it's done. I find there are so many writing craft books where they'll be like, here's an example, and it's like 3 pages of text from the book that you're reading through, and by the end you're like, what was the point of this? Or it's so long you just skip it. I didn't skip any of the examples in this book because he would just explain things extremely concisely. He actually doesn't even use those many examples where he's like sharing a block of the text. He really just explains it and you understand it. And I understood it even when it was books that I hadn't read, which I really appreciated. And there weren't any spoilers that I could tell, except for some spoilers for Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I think some spoilers for Game of Thrones if you haven't watched the show. I have only watched the show. But anyway, if you skip examples because you don't like spoilers, those are the only ones that I noticed. But yeah, the examples were really awesome. Also in the beginning of the book, he starts with some more general things like topics like prologues and beginnings and exposition, which even though they're general topics that I find in other craft books, I actually like learn shit. I learned new shit that I hadn't previously known, even though they were more general topics. And it was also great because you're seeing it through that fantasy and sci-fi lens, which I think is really important. Like the chapter on prologues, fantasy and sci-fi writers are the biggest culprits when it comes to unnecessary prologues. I will like go to my grave saying that the reason why people hate prologues is because people in fantasy and sci-fi do a lot of unnecessary prologues that nobody wanted. And so what I like in his prologue chapter is he really breaks down when a prologue is necessary, when a prologue is not, and like why you might want a prologue, and also when you might be using a prologue incorrectly. And he uses some examples of books that have not done a good job so that you understand when and when not to use a prologue, because I find that often people are just like, only do if it's necessary, and then that becomes so subjective, like what is necessary prologue? And the same I found with exposition. Like I find so many people say show don't tell, but they don't show you how to show and not tell. And so I think it was really great, and he has that chapter is so good because he breaks down how you can do it better and some different techniques, so that, because especially in fantasy and sci-fi you have to explain so many things, and it's so easy to info dump or to not know how and when to share that information. And I like that he really broke that down and gave you some really good tips for how to do that. I thought that was fantastic. I also really liked all these specific chapters that were very specific to fantasy and sci-fi. So there's sections on magic systems, on secret societies and worlds. So if you, like me, do a lot of contemporary and urban fantasy, you'll have a lot of hidden worlds, on religions, on political structures and commerce, on empires, how to construct your empires. And every single chapter I learned a bunch of stuff. I think that's what I appreciated the most about this book, because I do find there are a lot of craft books I read and they're just regurgitating the same advice that everybody else has given a million times. And what I liked about this is that I was consistently learning new things. Maybe if I was on his YouTube channel, I would just kind of, maybe I'd be more familiar with his stuff and I would have already learned things. But if you just want to read the craft book, I think it was really good. And I can only speak to the craft book because I haven't seen any of the YouTube videos, but did such a really good job on that, which I really appreciated. And now for the cons. So the first con is there is some ableist language, which is kind of annoying. I hope that he kind of realizes that and takes it out in the future, like when going through to volume 2, for example. Another con is that there was a very large amount on empires. So there was like how empires are built and how they're sustained and how they fall. And it was 3 whole chapters, and it just felt like so much on empires. I do understand why there was so much though, because so much high fantasy and epic sci-fi will rely on empire systems. Like, it is classic that there is an all-powerful empire and the hero has to work with rebels or revolutionaries to overthrow it, or the hero is suffering under some sort of corrupt empire. It's just very common in high fantasy and like epic sci-fi. So I understand why he spent all of that time on it. I think just for me personally, because I write primarily contemporary and urban fantasy and like light sci-fi, it was just like, it felt like such a slog. And I think it was just because it wasn't that relevant to me. I do want to write like high fantasy and epic sci-fi in the future, in which case I'm sure it'll be really useful and I'll be really thankful for those chapters. But just like at the time when I was reading through it, it just felt like so much and I was like, aww. So that's just my feelings about it. And my last con, in the end, he had this final chapter that was about like how to plan your novel. He did specify that this was just how he planned his novels, and people didn't have to use it. They kind of like take it or leave it, but he just wanted to show people how he planned them. And I kind of just like didn't care for it. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm so set in my ways with using like a save the cat structure, hybrided with Story Genius, that I just like don't care to learn about how other people plan novels, because I very much doubt I'm going to deviate from that. But I also just think you can't show someone how to plot or plan a novel in a single chapter. I think there's a reason that people write whole entire books about that. I just don't think you're gonna get through it in a chapter, and he didn't really need to, because the whole book is about world building and like writing. It kind of felt like it was put in there to try and be a catch-all book, and I think that's my problem with some craft books, is that they try and be everything, and it's just, you don't really need that, especially like this one that's so specific. I just didn't think it was necessary, and I wished it wasn't there, and I wish there was something like more world building to like come into the end. I thought that would have been like really cool, or even something small on like Hero's journey, I think would have been a lot more useful than talking about how he plans his novels. Personal feeling. Now for my final recommendation. I think if you are a fantasy or sci-fi writer, this is 100% a book you should check out. I would say like, I would put this in my like craft books that you must read if you're writing fantasy or sci-fi, up there with like Save the Cat and Story Genius, because I think this is so good. I learned so many things reading this book. Like when I go to plan my world building for the first time, I feel like I'm going to have so much help and so many great things I've learned from this book, and I'll be able to keep going back to it as a reference. I'm honestly like really impatient to see him do a volume 2, and I'm definitely going to be like going on his YouTube like, are you gonna do a volume 2 of this? Because I would love to read a volume 2. I just find that it has so many specific genre things that are so great and important, and all of the titles and the examples that he brings up are ones that you probably have read if you're interested in fantasy or sci-fi, or like seen or like played when it comes to the video games, and it's just so extremely relevant. And I just think that this is like fantastic. I haven't found a book better, so I'll let you know if I find a book better, but for right now, I would say this is definitely like the best craft book I've read specifically for fantasy and sci-fi. I find a lot of other craft books that are general try and like nudge their way into being like, you could also use this for fantasy and sci-fi, and it's just not the same as like having something very specifically for it. And so I definitely highly recommend this book. Thank you so much for watching this craft book review of On Writing and Worldbuilding. I'll have all the links below for you to check out the book. Not sponsored. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to me already, please subscribe. And if you have any recommendations for like specific sci-fi and fantasy craft books that you've read that you think are really good, like for sure link them below, and I would be happy to check them out. But yeah, this one was really good. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!